Everyone, it's my pleasure to introduce my longtime friend and colleague when I represented L.U. Harris as Economic Advisor, Alameda District 5 Supervisor Carson, who has a wonderful event around the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And Keith, tell us about the event. Let's talk about the Civil Rights Act and how things have changed. It was great.
Sure. Well, first of all, Zenny, it's really good to have this opportunity to be on your blog, and I, really miss having you here in Oakland because you were on some level a good consciousness for people to kind of, be able to have to answer questions about things that were going on in a way that really stimulated thought, and I really, really appreciate you for that. And you're still doing that, just in a different venue. Before we even talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we really got to kind of put things in perspective. Before the Civil Rights Act, we were fighting against discrimination, and we were fighting against racism, direct racism in this area. Before the Civil Rights Act went into effect, there were lynchings in this country, primarily of African American males more so than anybody else. According to some data that's out there, over 5,300 lynchings took place after the 1865 all the way up until almost 1935. And before the lynchings and the discrimination, there was slavery. And over 1,800,000 individuals were engaged in slavery just in the United States that were of African descent. Before slavery, there was individuals who went to the continent of Africa, and according to data, over 11 million Africans were either bought, sold, or stolen from Africa to be engaged in this international thing of working free labor in other countries, primarily the United States and the Caribbean. And so, as we talk about the Civil Rights Act in 1964, which was really to make sure that we dealt with fair accommodations for anybody of color, particularly African Americans and people of color. It talked about fair employment opportunities for people of color, and particularly blacks of color. It talked about the Voting Rights Act. It gave people the right to vote, to go and to put people in office in 1964. That is really what we're commemorating, and we're going to have people who were active in the movement at that time. We're very fortunate to have Howard Moore Jr., who was a well-known civil rights attorney at that time, actually came from the Atlanta area, the area where you are right now, and he was legal counsel for the Southern Leadership Conference, and he was also Angela Davis's attorney. And so Angela Davis is going to be a part of the commemoration and discussion. It was really the idea of Elaine Brown, who at one point in time was over the Black Panther Party, who came up with, let's have this commemoration. And then we're having Clayborne Carson, who is a professor at Stanford, who oversees the King Papers and is well recognized for his chronicling of black history, and particularly around the civil rights movement. So we're encouraging everybody to come out, because we want to kind of talk about what took place during that time period, revisit it, and maybe at some point find out, have we moved forward? Because we're also saying that the struggle still continues in all of those areas that we were supposed to have received civil rights for in 1964.
Hey, by the way, what's the address for Beebe Memorial?
It's 3900 Telegraph Avenue. 3900 Telegraph Ave, and it's right next to the MacArthur BART station, a block away from the MacArthur BART station in Oakland.
Now I have to ask you, over this period of time, how much have things changed in your view?
I think that they have camouflaged themselves, and I think that because of the fact that coming out of the civil rights movement, coming out of that time period, people kept a light on and attention on the disparities and the problems that were happening among ethnic groups, and particularly African Americans and other people of color. Because keep in mind, kind of around that time frame, there was also the farm laborers actions that were going on to focus on more Spanish speaking, and there was also people coming out of the concentration camps that the Japanese went into in this area, and so that kind of culminated around a lot of activity of disparity, even though the emphasis was on African Americans, because disproportionately we suffered through slavery, we suffered through the transatlantic slave trade, we suffered through the lynchings disproportionately in this country than anybody else. So how have they changed? They've kind of been camouflaged. Instead of not being able to buy a house now because of them blocking you, we have gentrification. In most of our communities that are urban communities, even right here in Oakland, I'm sure in different parts of the area where you are in the South, gentrification is taking place, whereas blacks were at some point given land that was abandoned by whites and others when there was white flight moving to an area where they didn't want to be with African Americans and other people of color. Now they're reclaiming those areas because the infrastructure for city government is still there, meaning transportation corridors and all the other things, making it easier to get to jobs. And so therefore the cost of living in these areas have escalated. The abandonment of our educational system in most of the urban community has taken place, kind of as, again, a camouflage for where things were. We were fighting for education and fighting for the ability to be educated, and now many of our urban schools don't have the same equipment as a lot of the rural and suburban schools to educate and train people. As such, a lot of the schools are in disrepair that are in the urban community, where still there's an essence and a recognizable number of African Americans, Spanish-speaking Asians, poor whites who are struggling to survive, still have to go for their education. So it doesn't really give them the fair shot of being able to prepare themselves for the jobs that are out there. And you can see the effect of all of that still happening under kind of this cloak in our community. So that's why we say the struggle still continues.
Do you think also that perhaps we haven't, as a country, done enough educating? Even though we have the first African American president, it seems like we have a generation that feels that perhaps they're more privileged, and because things don't work out for them, perhaps now they have movements like the Tea Party, even though, and I'm not saying Tea Party is racist, but it has racist elements in it. And then, of course, today we had 2 Las Vegas police officers that were killed by people who were said openly in a press conference today to be white supremacists. So where have we gone wrong in that way, or is it that it's more complicated because on the same day we had Sir Mix-a-Lot and the Seattle Symphony, right? And you know, and so it's this great example of how hip hop has brought us together, which would never happen if we're not from 1964 Civil Rights Act. So where are we? Are we that much more complicated as a society? Are we, where are we?
Ziggy, I think you asked a very good question, and I think it is complicated on some level, because if you're living in an urban area, if you're living at or below a certain poverty level, then you're focused on surviving. You're focused on where do you get your next meal, how do you pay for shelter, how do you keep your kids clothed, how do you deal with health needs, even though we have Obamacare now going into effect. So you're focused on that, and you're not necessarily going to the school board meetings. You're not going to the city council meetings. You're not going to the places where decisions are being made that affect you directly and indirectly, because you're dealing with how do I survive from day to day. During the civil rights movement, people they had the same struggles, but what they did was they came together as a voice, and they said that they were going to stop the buses that didn't allow you to sit up front, and we'd rather walk than to sit in the back of the bus, and people came together to have that voice. I hate to say this, but that's why I say it's complicated. Once we got Barack Obama in office, most of us got real quiet, and we stopped talking about the issues that are there. And we, we said, hey, we've elected a black president, and we've done our job. Let him go off, right? And every president up to that point, including Clinton, including Bush and everybody else, we still had our voices there. We talked about those issues, and we've been conspicuously quiet as progressive people, as people of color, and as African Americans about what's going on. I mean, yes, we should celebrate that we've turned a historic milestone with an African American president, but that doesn't allow him to be taken off the hook for making sure that we focused not just in words, but in resources in terms of coming back for education and housing and full employment and stuff in the urban core, and the people who are now being warehoused in prison, that we really do try to see if we can put them in a position as they come out, even before they come out, that they re-enter society with at least some skills to try and defend for themselves and their families.
You hit on something that has me ask this question, and I think it's something that we can both relate to personally. When I tried out to be a Kerry delegate years ago, it's a fellow who actually won, Tony West. And you know Tony very well, so do I. I've interviewed Tony a bunch of times. I remember he said, hey, change this video a little bit because I might wind up in a certain position. And I said, what's that? And he says, I can't tell you. He is now Assistant Attorney General.
Yes,
right?
he is.
The point I'm making is that we have a lot of connections that, and correct me if you think that I'm wrong, but it seems that there hasn't been a large group of us as African Americans who've been able to say we have a reach into the White House or the Justice Department in this way. Is that, rather, has that also made us complacent, or has it created a whole new class of power African Americans that hasn't been talked about much, or both?
Well, we one of the things I witnessed when Barack went into office was originally in the first couple of years, is that there was a whole resurgence of people who went to Washington, who were of color, who were African American, who had a progressive thought process in place, young whites who were a progressive thought process. They went in, and not only were they being given an opportunity to be department heads and everything else, they were given an opportunity to be in the tent, if you will, over in the Department of Justice, like Tony, who was a third-ranking person in the Department of Justice. And keep in mind, we have the Attorney General's African American, so I mean, let's keep that in mind. But we also had a whole group of individuals who went in kind of above the intern level. They were able to get a fair-paying job, a decent-paying job, to go through the training and preparing for the future leaders, and those were the 20-somethings, the 25-somethings. So they were given this opportunity, and there was a new energy in Washington, D.C. with this, the stimuli that came in. And again, I guess once they got emerged there, some people just got upset about the system that they were working in, and they decided to go back home. Other individuals have stayed, and they're working their way up in the system, and all departments, from the Department of Health and Human Services back there to all these areas, there has been a seeding of new people, younger people, who at some point in the near future will be assuming power. So, and that's a part of what happens in our history. But at the same point in time, we, the activists, have made our voices very conspicuously quiet, and I think we have to point fingers at ourselves for not keeping the 2014 Civil Rights Movement still front and center.
So is this event on the 18th sort of a reawakening in a sense?
I always think there needs to be links in the chain, and this is a link in the chain. It is a stimuli to say, let's take this time and period, a commemoration of 50 years, and let's bring it back to people's attention. And through that process of shining a light on it, then we do an assessment at some point. Are we better off today? Maybe so. But is this where we should stay? No. The struggle continues, and we got to take the struggle on to the next level. Not only for ourselves, but for our children and their children to come. And so we are focusing on a lot of people to show up on June the 18th, 6 to 8 at Beebe Memorial, 3900 Telegraph Avenue, free. It's going to be an incredible event with Dwayne Wiggins of Tony. There will be, again, Howard Moore Jr., Clayborne Carson, and Angela Davis, and again, Elaine Brown, who I can't thank enough for really conceiving of this idea.
And before we close, I want to tell the viewers about what you're doing as supervisor, any particular initiatives you want people to know about, those that are, because people will be watching this not just in the county, but Bangladesh too. But
yeah. One of the things that we're totally focused on in this office, and I'm taking it because I do have a platform on a statewide basis through the Supervisor Association on the national level, is two kind of things. One is to make sure that there's a real focus and an even playing field on workforce development, to make sure that we put instituted not only here in the East Bay and in the Bay Area, but throughout California, especially in areas that are depressed or at or below a certain poverty level where the concentration of people of color are, is to put resources that have outcomes that we can measure for workforce development. And within that process, we're really focusing in a lot more on African American men, and those especially returning from prison, because in many cases, if you look at all of the disparities that are out there, African American men jump off the chart. Healthcare disparities off the chart. Reentry from prison off the chart. Unemployment off the chart. Not connected with their families and children off the chart. And so if we concentrate services there to kind of help out, I think we'll be not only doing a good service for them, that population, those guys and women, but for their families, their community, and thus for ourselves. So Zanny, again, I want to say thanks for giving me this opportunity. It's good to see you. I'm going to try to connect with you more often.
Anytime, and hopefully I'll get back by then to be there, and I should.
That'd be good.
Definitely. But
that'd be.
Got it.